Yevamos Daf primarily discusses what happens in a situation where a woman has a suffix child. Therefore, she's not sure if she's falling to Yibum or if she's not falling to Yibum, or possibly she went ahead and she did Yibum, and it's a suffix whether she had a child from the first husband and therefore the Yavam was Usser, or she had that child is from the second husband. So first we'll discuss if she's allowed, if she married somebody else from the Shuk and she has a suffix child, if she's allowed to stay married to him. Then we'll talk about the halacha of where we're not sure if the child was from the first husband or from the second husband, how we could possibly figure it out. When we have a case of a suffix mamzer, what is the halacha of the suffix mamzer? And if there's an inheritance and we're not sure if it belongs to the yavam or to the suffix child, who gets it and how we divide it up. So let's begin the Gemara. The Gemara is discussing a situation in which a woman fell from her husband and she's not sure if she's falling to Yibum or not. She has a child, but the child is less than 30 days old. As a matter of fact, the child dies within 30 days. So there's a machlokes between Rav Shimon ben Gamliel and the Rabbanon. What is the status of a child that does not live for 30 days? Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says it's a safek nefel. If it's a safek nefel, which means a miscarriage, if it's an nefel, then she would not be considered to be having a child. She would be falling to Yibum. If it's a viable child, then it's not falling to Yibum. So the machlokas there was that Rav Shimon ben Gamliel held that this is a suffix. It's a suffix whether or not she fell to Yibum, and the Rabbanon held that she certainly fell to Yibum. It's certainly considered to be a nefel, and she fell to Yibum. Now, according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, the Gemara discusses what should she do if she married somebody else in the shuk. That is, she has a child. It was less than 30 days old. She assumed it was going to live. She went and didn't do Yibum. She went and she married somebody else from the shuk, and then the child died. Now it's a suffix whether she's allowed to be married to that man or she's not. So the Gemara says, well, if he's a Yisrael, it's very simple. Let him give her chalitza. If he's a Kohen, we have a problem, because if he would give her chalitza, then she becomes usher to him. So does she have to get chalitza, and therefore she has to separate from her new husband who's a Kohen? Or can we assume that the child was not an nefel and therefore she didn't fall to Yibum? So that's a machlokas between Ravina and Masharshia. What did Rava say? So Ravina says she does not require chalitza. We go with the Rabbanon here in this opinion. We'll be samach on them, and therefore we won't require chalitza. She can stay married to her husband who is a Kohen. Now Rav Masharshia said no. Rava said that she has to get chalitza, therefore she has to separate from her husband. The Gemara says that Ravina said to Rav Masharshia, at night he paskin like you, but in the morning he said like me, and therefore it's mutter. She doesn't have to go get chalitza from the yavam. And he said that if you're going to matir, like the way you want to be matir this, then we'll also matir chelev. So he was very unhappy with that psak. So now the Gemara wants to know what would be in a similar situation. That's where a man marries a woman who is pregnant or nursing the child of another man, the child of her first husband. So there we say he has to separate. Some chalkas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, whether he has to separate permanently or he has to separate until she finishes the pregnancy and the nursing, and then she could remarry. So the Gemara there says, in that situation, what should she do if her new husband's a Kohen? So if she'll separate from him with a get, she'll be divorced, she won't be able to stay married to him, she won't be able to go back to him. So do we say that the same thing applies? Do we say that, okay, we'll let her go, and we'll let her just separate from him, but without a get? So the Gemara says, you can't learn anything from the case of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim. Over there, we relied on the Chachamim's opinion, at least according to Ravina, to say that she doesn't have to get chalitza. She could assume that she's okay because the Chachamim held that she's okay. The child's not a nefel. Here, there's no opinion to rely on. Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim are only arguing whether she has to separate permanently or temporarily, but they both agree that she needs a get. Even the Chachamim, who say she can go back to him after the pregnancy and the nursing is over, say that she needs a get for the meantime. So therefore, we cannot, we have no one to rely on, and therefore she's usher to continue to be married to this Kohen. Now, the Gemara has another question on the topic. The Gemara says, what happens if the guy separates from her without giving a get? He just runs away. Do we say that since he runs away, he don't require a get now, or do you have to track him down, force him to come back and give her the get? Or do we just say, hey, he ran away, so we don't have to be afraid that he's going to be together with her? So the Gemara says in Chalak is between Rav Acha and Rafram. We don't know which one's which, but the Gemara brings that there was an incident that happened where Rafram said that it's okay, and you don't have to chase after him and force him to give the get. All right, now the Gemara goes to the situation in which we had a suffix who the child is from. That is, a woman fell to Yibum, and she married her Yavam, and then the child was born 7 months later. We don't know if this is a 7-month pregnancy and it's a child of the Yavam, or it's a 9-month pregnancy and it's a child of the original first husband. If it's a child of the original first husband, then she has no right to, she did not fall to Yibam at all. As a matter of fact, her relationship between the second man is a relationship of nus, and they are chayav a carbon chatas for that. So what we have is a suffix chatas. Now the child, we said, is fine either way, because the child's the son of the second man. Of course, if the child's the son of the first husband, then of course there's nothing wrong with him. He's a regular child. His parents were legally married. If he's a child of the second man, then the first man died without children, and therefore she did fall to Yibam, and he's fine either way. However, the man and the woman have a suffix chatas, and therefore they have to bring a carbon asham. That's what you bring when you're not sure if you owe a chatas or not. So the Gemara says, why do we say that you have to bring a carbon asham? We should paskin based on rov that it must have been that this is the child of the first husband, and therefore she has to bring a vadai carbon chatas, because we should assume, since rov women give birth after 9 months, this child must be from a 9-month pregnancy, therefore the child of the first husband, therefore she didn't fall to Yibam, and therefore it's also to her to be married to the second man. They did a violation of a chayav a krisus b'shogeg, and they have to bring carbon chatas for sure. The Gemara says you can't go with the rov. So this question was asked, the Gemara says from Rav to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, in my town, many women give birth after 7 months. So Rav said, what kind of proof was that from your town? Your town is not the whole world. In the whole world, there's a very clear rov that rov pregnancies go for 9 months, not for 7 months. So Gemara says what he meant to say is as follows. He meant to say that you're right, there's a rov. However, there is a percentage of women who give birth after 7 months. In this situation, we have a weakening of the rov. That was called a reyes, and that's because all women who give birth after 9 months are visibly pregnant after 3 months. In this case, she was obviously not visibly pregnant after 3 months, because we wouldn't have a suffix. If she was visibly pregnant after 3 months, we would know for sure that it was from the 9-month pregnancy and it was from the first husband. So obviously we're talking about a situation where she wasn't. Therefore, she can't tell me that there's a rov that is a 9-month pregnancy, because then she should have been visibly pregnant after 9 months. After 3 months. So the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. If you're telling me every woman who gives birth after 9 months has a 9-month pregnancy, is visibly pregnant after 3 months, then obviously this must be a 7th month. So why do we even have a suffix here? So the Gemara says, no, we have to change it slightly. It's not that all women who have a 9-month pregnancy are visible after 3 months, but most. And therefore, for this situation, you have the fact that she wasn't visibly pregnant after 3 months is a reyesa, and you cannot go with the rov that most women give birth from a 9-month pregnancy and not a 7-month. Therefore, we don't have a rov, we have a suffix, and we have to bring a carbon asham taloi. Okay, now the Gemara goes into the status of the child. So Gemara quotes a brayso that says the first child, as we said, is okay. Either way, he's not a problem. Therefore, he could be the kohen gadol. Nothing wrong with him. He's definitely not a mamzer. However, if they stay married and they give birth to another child, so that's a possible mamzer, because he could be the child of the because if the first child was the child of the first husband, then she didn't fall to Yibam, and her relationship with this Yavam is an Isser Eshusach, and the second child's a Mamzer. So the Gemara says we have a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov what the halacha of the second child is. The Tanakama says as follows. It says it's a Mamzer misafik. It's a Mamzer out of the doubt. And Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says ein mamzer misafik. It's not a mamzer misafik. Gemara says, what does this mean? Mamzer misafik, not mamzer misafik. What does it mean practically? So Gemara says, Abaye and Rava, what it means. Abaye says, it means as follows. The Tanakama means to say that it's a suffix mamzer, and the suffix mamzer can't marry anybody. Can't marry a regular Yisrael because he might be a mamzer. Can't marry a mamzeres because he might be a kosher Yisrael, and therefore he can't marry anyone. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov comes and he says that this is the status of a vade mamzer. The halacha of a suffix mamzer is that it's considered to be a vade mamzer. A suffix mamzer is allowed to marry a mamzeres. We give it the assumption that it is a full-fledged mamzer and is allowed to marry a mamzeres. Therefore, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is going leniently. According to Rava, it's the other way around. The Tanakama said it's a suffix mamzer, and a suffix mamzer is considered to be a vade mamzer, and therefore allowed to marry a mamzeres. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said no, he's not allowed to marry a mamzeres. Now, the Gemara says the reason why Abaye and Rava set it up this way is because they have a different machlokes as to what the halacha is. And we know that the halacha is always like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and therefore they want to establish Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's opinion with the actual halacha. What's the machlokes what the halacha is? That's based on a different Mishnah, which is a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar, not to be confused with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rabbi Elazar against the Chachamim, against Hillel really, and a machlokes Rav and Shmuel, how we paskin. So what's that? So that we have a Mishnah that says that a vadai is allowed to marry a vadai. That is, a kosher Yisrael is allowed to marry a kosher Yisraelis. A mamzer is allowed to marry a mamzeres. A vadai and a suffix, or a suffix and a vadai, or a suffix and a suffix are not allowed to marry each other. An example of that is a shtuki, a sufi, and a kusi. So a suffix is a shtuki, a sufi, and a kusi. What are these? So a shtuki is a child who's calls his father, and his mother silences him and says it's not your father. So we don't know who his father is, we don't know if he's a mamzer or not. And a sufi is a child who was found in the street, as it were, with unknown parentage. A kusi is a child of kusim who did not keep the halachos of marriage correctly. And all these are considered to be a suffix mamzer. They're not allowed to marry each other, and they're not allowed to marry a vadai. They can't marry a vadai because if they can't marry a Yisraelis because they might be a mamzer, can't marry a mamzer because they might be a kosher, can't marry each other because one might be a kosher and the other might be a puzzle. Now, that is the halacha of Rabbi Elazar. Now the Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav that halacha is like the statement of Rabbi Elazar, but when he said that to Shmuel said that Hillel argues. Therefore, the halacha is not like that. Hillel says that a suffix is allowed to marry a suffix. Where do you see that? So that's a statement that Hillel said that there are 10 different types of ancestry that came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Kahanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalolim, Gerim, Fried Avadim, that's Mishacharim, Mamzerim, Nesinim, Shtukim, and Asufim. All of them are allowed to marry one to the other. Now, that doesn't mean that all 10 are allowed to marry any of the other 9, but it means that there's groups in which they're allowed to marry each other. That is, Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim are allowed to marry each other. Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalalim, Gerim, and Meshucharim are allowed to marry each other. Mamzerim, Nesinim, Shtuki, and Asufim are all allowed to marry each other. So therefore, Hillel said that a suffix mamzer is allowed to marry a suffix mamzer and also a vadai mamzer. So therefore, he's arguing on Rabbi Elazar. Now, what's the halacha there? So that's a machlokes, as we said, between Rav and Shmuel. One said the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar, one said the halacha is like Hillel. Abaye paskins like the opinion of Shmuel, who says that the halacha is like Hillel, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov has to hold that way also, and therefore he learns that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said leniently in this Mishnah that a suffix is allowed to marry a suffix and a vadai. Now, Rava goes the other way. Rava holds like Rav, who holds like Rabbi Elazar, not Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and therefore he set up Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov as going l'chumra. That way it all fits together. Now, Abaye says I have a proof that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that a vadai is considered, that a suffix mamzer is considered to be a vadai mamzer as well. Where do you see that? The Brisa where Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that somebody should not marry multiple women or should not be physically together with multiple women, and he doesn't know which one is which, because then he won't know who his children are, and his children won't know who their brothers and sisters are. People will end up marrying their children or their brother or their sister, and will end up making mamzerim in the world, and it will fulfillment of the pasuk. It says, "Umala aretz zima," the world will be filled with immorality. Now, you see, these will all be sfekos, because it's all a case of nobody knows who anybody is, and yet he calls it zima, he calls it immorality, and he says the world will be filled with mamzerim. So Rava says that's not a proof. He's not saying that there'll be vade mamzerim, he's saying it'll be zima. Zima is a contraction of the word zumahi. It's a lot of sfekos, you don't know what's what. Now the Gemara goes further on the statement of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said further, a man should not marry a woman in one country and marry a woman in another country. Here he's not doing anything gasser. He's just marrying two women in two different lands. The problem there is, though, is that the children of each woman will not know who their brother or sister are. They will not know what other children their father has fathered in a different land, and they may end up meeting each other and marrying each other. You shouldn't create a situation like that. So the Gemara says, is that true? But we know that the Rabbanan used to sometimes marry people far away from their hometown. The Gemara says that when Rav would travel to Dardashir, he would say, who would like to marry me during the time that I'm here? Rav Nachman went to Shachnatziv, he would say the same thing. So how are they allowed to do that? They would have wives far apart from each other. The Gemara says it's not a problem. They were chachamim, they were rabbanon, and therefore their children would be very well aware who their father was, and they would not marry somebody with the same father. You wouldn't have a situation like that. In other words, there's another problem. How are they allowed to do that? We know that there is a halacha of dam chimud. That's when a woman first agrees to marry. She has a menstrual blood, which even if she doesn't see it, we know that it exists, and therefore she's tamei for 7 days. Of these chachamim were coming and saying, who's going to marry me for a short time? They wouldn't be able to do anything during that time because we would consider their wives to be nida. So what was the point? So Gemara says 2 answers. Either they sent a message 7 days earlier before they came saying who wants to marry them, and that is the moment when the dam chimud comes, and they would be taharos already by the time the chachamim actually arrived. The other one is that they did not intend to actually be together with these wives physically. They just wanted to have what's called pas basalo. They wanted to be married. It will help fight the Yetzer Hara, and they didn't actually intend to do anything. It didn't actually do anything. The Gemara says, on that note, Rabbi Elazar Yaakov also says a person should not stay married to a woman or marry a woman with intent to divorce her shortly, and she doesn't know about it because it says, don't have bad thoughts about somebody. You intend to do something bad to them, and they think that you're on common ground and you're okay. All right, now the Gemara will go on to the discussion of the suffix in the Yavam who split an inheritance. So we know that when a man falls to Yibum, when a man's wife falls to Yibum, the Yavam, not only does he marry the man's wife, he also inherits all his property. Here you have a situation in which you have a suffix who gets the property of the mace, of the nifter, the one who died. And that is because we don't know who the child is. There's a child born from his wife, and we don't know if it's born from a 9-month pregnancy from the first husband, from the mace, or a 7-month pregnancy from the second husband, from the Yavam. So the child and the Yavam come to argue over the property of the mace. The Yavam says, I did Yibum, you're my son. He says to the child, and therefore I get the full inheritance. After I die, you'll get it from me, because you're my son. But for now, I get it all. The son says, no, I'm the son of my first husband, therefore I'm the son of the first man, of my mother's first husband, and therefore I get that full inheritance. You didn't do Yibum, you just did something else. So there's no way of knowing who owns the land, who owns the property, who inherits it, and therefore the halacha is, they split it, they divide it evenly. Now, what happens if the Yavam's gone, but he has other children? And now you have the suffix and the Yavam that are coming to divide the property of the first husband of the man who died. So the Yavam says, he's my father only, I get all of it. The children say, he's not your father, you were a son of our father, and therefore our father rightfully inherited all the property of the dead man, and you are our brother, and you divide it up together with us. So you certainly get a piece, but you don't get all of it, and therefore we want to split it together with you. So the Gemara wants to say that this should be a situation in which he could say, look, I get, you're a suffix if you get, and therefore I push you off and I say you don't get anything, because you have to prove that you get. The burden of proof is on you. The Gemara compares it to a different situation, where you have a person, no Yibum involved, but you have a person who doesn't know who his father was. His mother was married to one man and then another man, and he doesn't know if he's a child of the first or the second. Each one has other children. Those others will say to him, look, you might not be from our family, therefore go to the other family. You're not our brother, you can't inherit with us. And both of them could push him away. Now, both of them could inherit from him, because if he dies, he doesn't know which, it's not known who his inheritors are. They'll split his property, but he can't get from each of them, because each of them could say, we for sure get, you suffix get, and therefore you got to prove it. So here also he should be able to say, here it's the reverse. He should say, I get for sure, either because I'm the son of the dead man, or because I'm the son of the Yavam, I get for sure, you're a suffix if you get, and therefore you have to prove. Someone says, no, that this is not comparable to that case. The simple reason is that here he does not know through whom he gets property. He wants to claim, I get property either way, but he can't say I'm a vadai about anything. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know if he's the son of the Yavam or the son of the original. Now, in the other case, though, each brother in each family, the brothers knew who their father was. They're saying, we're a vadai, a son of this man. Therefore, we certainly deserve this inheritance. it's certainly ours. You want to claim you get a piece too. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Prove it. Here, though, he can't say with certainty that he's the son of the Yavam. He can't say with certainty that he's the son of the brother who died. So, therefore, we don't know what to do. It's not considered that he could push them off. The Gemara says what it is comparable to, though, is a case where the Yavam and the Suffolk already split the property of the mace. That is, they came to discuss it. As we discussed earlier, they split the property, and therefore they each have a piece. Now, then this man dies, and now his sons are dividing up the inheritance. Now, what's happening now is that the Suffolk comes, and he says, hey, this Yavam had much more property than the original brother, who might be my father, and therefore I want a piece of this property as well. And I'll say to them as follows. Look, your father, who might be my father, got half the property of the person who died. That half only belongs to him if I'm your son, if I'm his son and your brothers. If that's the case, if you guys are planning on keeping that half the property, then I get a share of everything that he owns, and therefore I get a share along with you. If you don't want to give me a share of everything, if you don't want to assume that I'm your brother, so then give all that back to me, because I must be the son of the original brother who died, in which case there's no Yibam, and I get all of it. So that's a situation in which he wants to come and demand a larger share than just a piece. The question is, could he do that? In order for him to do that, he has to reopen a case that was already closed. The argument between him and the Yavam was a case that was already closed. He already split it. Does he have a right to reopen that question and bring it into this discussion? Or do we say, no, that case was closed. The only question now is, are you a brother with these other brothers? Are you a son of this Yavam or not? You can only resolve that issue. You can't prove that you're a brother, and therefore you don't get a piece of anything here. You can't say, well, if so, I get back this original splitting. So the Gemara says that's a question, can you reopen a case or not? The Gemara says that's a machlokas called Kum Dina or Hadar Dina. The Gemara says that is a machlokas between Rabbi Abba, who said the name of Rav Kum Dina, which means that you don't reopen the case, or Rabbi Yirmiyah, who says Hadar Dina, you do reopen the case, and therefore he has a good argument. Then the Gemara now wants to compare this to a different machlokas between the Tana named Admon and the Rabbanon. Admon and the Rabbanan have a machlokas about a case of somebody who owned land surrounded by a bunch of other fields. In order to get to his field, he had to have a path through one of their lands. He did have a pathway that he owned. Then he went away for a while. By the time he came back, his path had disappeared. It was overgrown, and nobody knows which field it went through. So what is he supposed to do? So Admon said he gets the shortest available possible path. That is, he gets a path. He has a right to a path for sure, but he gets the smallest size. We don't want to give him more land than he may deserve. The Chachamim say he has to purchase the path. He lost his rights and he has to buy one. Either that or he could learn how to fly. So now the Gemara says, what is the argument between the two? The Gemara says Admon has a good argument. He definitely had a path. He should get the smallest path. So here's the name of Rav. We're talking about where the fields around him were owned by 4 different people. And therefore, each person could say, who said he had a path through my field? Go get one from somebody else. You had a path from someone else, not by me. And therefore, he can't prove anything. The Gemara says, if that's true, so then what's Pshat in Admon? Why would he argue with that? That makes perfect sense. So the Gemara says, we're talking about a specific case. If the 4 people owned the land and it was always owned by 4 people, then he has no argument. If they 4 bought it from 4 other people, he has no argument. He doesn't know who owes him the route. He doesn't know who owes him the path. If 4 people bought it from one person, he also doesn't know who owes him the path. Meaning, at the time he left, all the lands that were owned by one person. Now, they're owned by 4 different people. Each one could say, it wasn't in my land. The problem is, the machlokas is in a case where all lands there were owned by one person, were owned by 4 different people at the time he left. And he came back, and one person had purchased all 4 lands. Now, he could say, you definitely bought the land where I had a path, so give me a pathway. So Admon says, that's what he says. He says, you owe me a path. The Chachamim say that the guy could say to him as follows, look, either you buy a path from me for a small amount, otherwise I will return the land to the people who sold it to me, and then you'll have nothing, because there'll be 4 different owners, and each one will push you off and say you didn't have land by me. Now that's saying that they could reopen the original sale, put it back in the previous status, and therefore the guy who bought it now has a right to say that we take into account the previous state, and therefore you don't get anything from me, you just have to purchase it from me. I'll charge you a low price, but otherwise be careful, you'll end up with nothing. So now the Gemara says that's comparable to this. And the Gemara says no, it's not comparable to this. It's different in two different ways. That is, over here he has an argument and he could say, you definitely owe me a path. In our case, there is no such argument to any of the brothers that you definitely owe me anything. All he could say was, I think maybe I should get something from you, but there is no argument you for sure owe me something. On the other hand, over there they have a right to push him away. He has a right to push him away because he could say, I always have an option of returning the land. You can't stop me. I could undo the sale and return it. There's nothing, I don't have to reopen a pre-existing case to do that. I could just undo the sale. Here, there's no option of undoing the sale. You have to reopen a previous discussion to have anything to discuss at all, and here you don't have that situation.